So, hi everyone, good morning, good afternoon, depending upon where you are. Little word of introduction by myself, perhaps, probably worthy of a few moments, and then we'll get into the content of the presentation. So, Steve Nunn, I'm a director within advisory services at CGI. I've been in the industry 45 years, so not quite as long as Daniel, but certainly I've seen IT evolve significantly over the tenure of my career. And, certainly I think personally, what I've seen over the last 2 to 3 years is probably the most revolutionary possibilities that we've got in front of us. So as the title denotes, what I'm going to spend the next 20 odd minutes around is looking at how we can start to drive towards what I affectionately know as zero-touch operations, i.e. the ability to run operations without a tremendous amount of manual intervention. And I will say tremendous amount because I always do believe there will be a need for manual intervention, for exceptions, etc. But I think the general industry feel now is that we can, with the technologies available to us, really start to drive that automated operations through IA, analytics, and other technologies. So let's really sort of go back and take a little bit of a history lesson, because I think history often can tell you what's going to happen for the future as well. Especially for me, when I started my career in IT, it was for a company called the General Post Office. And those that are old enough will remember those days and remember that became British Telecom. And my career started off with electrical mechanical, wasn't even any computers in sight. But having said that, when computers did turn up and they were extremely large and very cumbersome, they needed to be very much supported where they were landed. And therefore we had a very much of a geographic and a client stroke company proximity. But then we evolved the tools, and tools were then enabling us then to move away from being in the data center room on consoles onto systems that were able to consolidate information, etc., to system support engineers in various parts of the country, to the point then that obviously the whole notion of cost efficiencies started to raise its head as technology was able to drive a different behavior. And therefore, for many organizations, through outsourcing or other means, we started to move that necessary support offshore and or nearshore, depending upon regulatory and legal matters, in order to sort of drive the costs down, pool resources so you get economies of scale. But in essence, that was the real next evolution of IT operations, from being a technology-led support function to be then a technology and people-led consideration. And, it wasn't a surprise to me that when we started to see some of these digital technologies appearing for a lot around the business process use, etc., why it wasn't starting to be reviewed or viewed as the next evolution to IT operations management, and actually having technology starting to lead the discussion and capability of that next level of IT operations management. Now, clearly that is the next evolution in terms of cost efficiency, but equally so, it's the next evolution around use of technologies to further improve the, let's say, quality assurance on fixing and providing services, as well as becoming much more predictive or proactive in terms of our ability to start thinking about what needs to change. And certainly in our previous breakout session, we were talking about cloud sprawl, or the ability for businesses to start to drive their own procurement, and the need for sort of the right level of governance and technology to make sure that we can intervene correctly and manage it in the most cost-effective way. So what I'd like to do now is to spend a little time around that digital-led automation. We have moved from much what I would call a traditional business operations of human related hours centered around sort of fundamental activities, moving now to much more advanced activities through the ability to do robotic automation, enabling this whole notion of AI. As you'll see as we go through my presentation, I major a lot on bots. For me, bots are the robot or the person thing that it will enable a lot of what we want to do in terms of automated operations going forward. But bots are only as good as the information they're being fed or the directions they're being fed. So therefore, it's very, very important that we have the right level of back-end engine with regard to machine learning, i.e. the ability for the bot to learn what's going on, and the whole notion of capturing knowledge. I would say that in my past, a lot of engineers would say information was king. If they knew how to do something, then they were securing their job, and they were less keen to share their knowledge for fear of diluting their value. Whereas in this digital-led world, information is king, and anybody that can feed information into the engine is seen to be a key contributor for the future. So as I sort of opened up, one thing that I'm particularly interested in is bots. They are and will continue to play a pivotal role in this whole digital journey that both businesses and IT are embarking on. For many businesses, they are definitely looking at sort of the Internet of Things and the ability to collate distributed information, make sense of it, and through making sense of it, develop a course of actions to either remediate the issue and or inform intelligently somebody what they have to do. So as you can see from the diagram on the left, what I've tried to do is to show personally what I'm investigating more and more on, which is from an IT perspective, how can bots interact with the underlying application, i.e. building in operations into the application so it can communicate with a bot to tell it its condition, its health, and through that information, the bot, through the AI engine and knowledge base, can start to work out a course of action to maybe raise the database storage limit, increase the amount of processes that are required to activate a particular application. The ideas are endless per se, but the key thing here is the ability for the bot to interact with the underlying component, and it makes some level of sense around the ability to take that information and action against it. It's certainly in many industries, this whole notion of Internet of Things is becoming very prevalent, and being able to stick sensors pretty well anywhere, whether it's in the IT environment, whether it's in the business environment. If you look at petrochemical and other manufacturing industries where they've got sensors pretty well anywhere, the information those sensors are now sending back typically to a bot front end to then analyze what that information is being fed back into, using the AI engine then to start to determine the common trends with the information and what necessary automated workflows they can put in to resolve the issue, and indeed notify somebody that something has to be brought up and forward. I.e., classic example is I have a piece of equipment with 2 fans. The first fan fails, so therefore the bot understands through the Internet of Things sensors that has failed, but it does not dispatch an engineer to fix it because it's still got one that works, N+1, and it then schedules up the regular maintenance regime to go and fix that. So as you can see, that can be applied not only for business, but also IT, especially when you start thinking about where you have environments that are not quite data center, let's say, robust. Then the ability to sense when the environment is going down and getting resolution to that it's very, very important. And then last but not least, and although we're talking about ITOM today, actually everything's to do with the service desk, and whether that's interacting with voice or chat, or indeed social media. I've seen some companies now starting to use social media to detect issues and problems, and they have like facilitated resolution paths for that. But indeed, the latest one is obviously video. Everybody uses Zoom, everybody uses Teams. It's been a natural phenomena over the last year and a bit, and it's been a key enabler for us to keep working. And more people are now wanting to use that channel to get support from IT. So all of those inputs are able to be interacted by a bot. And as I say, the bot fundamentally at the back then needs to have intelligence, because it only does what it's told to do. And therefore the sort of AI engine is that brain that is looking at sort of continual patterns and being able to use analytical data to come up with self-learning and understanding from a repetitive type nature, how it can instruct then the bot to maybe execute some level of automation resolution, and or inform the end user of a knowledge article, etc. But indeed, if you look at what we've got here, is we've got a contained unit of input, understanding and output in terms of corrective actions, and that's starting to drive that whole notion of a zero level of support requirement. And as many of you may know, we've got a number of types of bots. So the chat bots typically directed towards the service desk, social bots that are really very, very interesting in terms of being able to pick up keywords that are going out across the social media and being able to collect those, analyze them, and either post an incident or inform supervisors or etc. do things. And then you've got the notion of the ability to do monitoring and or transactions. And the key thing here is one does not fix all. You need a family of bots within your environment in order to undertake that zero touch support capability. So now let's take what the bot is, what I would call the sort of foundational engine along with the other components, and start to look at what a good next generation technical operations platform, may be looking like. Well, clearly we've always strived for this notion of moving away from being reactive to proactive, and our ability to collect alerts and incidents and being able to analyze those, and wherever possible put an automated resolution path to those, is becoming very much more prevalent everywhere. And the ability to do that while still recording that in typically the service desk or another area of technical operations, so that the incident is not lost. Obviously, if the incident is not fixed, but is fixed through manual intervention, then that is captured in the resolution path, and analytics starts then to capture those patterns and then starts to suggest automated resolution of that type of issue. Now, one thing that I've learned throughout my life in IT is that operational processes need to be very, very robust, i.e. an immature, poorly implemented process, automated, is still an immature and poorly performant process. So for those that are considering automating things within technical operations or indeed broader IT, now's the time to really start to reflect on the maturity of the process, the maturity of the process flow, and saying, if I automate it, do I automate a bad process, or am I actually automating something that's worth automating? And that's why it really needs to be fully ITIL process led and then enabled by technology. And I'm using these metaphors, but a technology looking for a problem never really gets full traction. A problem looking for a technology is usually the most successful in implementation. And so therefore, with the ability to really robustly define and implement end-to-end processes that broach across both all elements, let's say, of an organization, so they're not just directed in one particular area, is very, very key. And then, as we will be discussing more in the coming presentations, and the ability to leverage that digital technology to actually reduce that manual intervention and get a more repeatable experience going, actually drives the service quality up, and through the analytics will drive that innovation and continuous improvement objective. And obviously we need to integrate that into the operating model. Now, so many organizations I see have some really good ideas, they implement a technology, it works, but it's not used because it's not integrated in the organization, so not everybody is leveraging its capabilities. So therefore, through having those characteristics, we are actually able to move much more precisely and meaningfully into a much more zero-touch approach to IT. Now, and as I was sort of intimating, the notion of technical operations playing a pivotal role in an overall IT schema is increasingly more important. And as you can see from this very simplified diagram, the tech ops plays a major role in integrating and providing support to a number of the key technical towers. Now, a lot of people ask me, well, why haven't you moved that technical operations over to the application space? And often that is actually the case when you've got a very in-house operation. But when you've got either a best of breed or a targeted sourcing model, then often what we see now is this whole notion of a service integration and management layer being applied over the technical operations, which tends to be focused on that infrastructure side of things, and then each of the business channels of applications being fed up through the service integration and management layer to get their end-to-end support requirements. And the reason why we say that is that typically you'll see the apps being much more done by business silos and therefore by specific specific application portfolios, whereas technical operations now, thankfully, are getting much more standardized in terms of the technologies. And to some degree, we have a best of breed sourcing model, but that tends to be a mixture of in-house and outsourcing. And indeed, certainly from our experience, what we're seeing at the moment is a much more pervasive approach to insourcing some of these areas than actually asking for an outsourcing agent. And certainly, although this is not part of the scope of this discussion, that whole notion of service integration and management being a component of the company's responsibility has been an age-old discussion, but one that is still playing out. So as you can see here, if you overlay idle processes across all of this, it's important that we have it end-to-end, and that technical operations has a pivotal role in pretty well every operational process that we want to implement, but may be a contributor rather than actually being an owner. So therefore, what we're doing here is we're going to focus on that technical operations layer, and then I'm just going to tease you with a few other thoughts. Now, if we look down into the next generation tech ops platform, this is a relatively simplified schema, and it's done for a reason. And actually, I picked up on it from the breakout session. Many organizations have lots of tools. They love tools. They want tools. Very few have gone through the pain of rationalizing them and coordinating and focusing them on specific areas. So for me, when I do sort of ITOM type transformation programs, I kind of use this schema as the ability to position appropriate tools in the appropriate box. And this isn't full, it's just a simplified view. But what it tries to demonstrate is that, we've got stuff, and that stuff has to be managed and operated. And in order to do so, you need to know what's going on with that stuff. So in essence, on the right-hand side, fundamentally, I need to know what that stuff looks like. I think, previous presentation around CMDB made it very evident that it's one of the unsung hero parts of IT, that if you get it right, then you have a lot of opportunity. And therefore, a lot of what I describe here becomes achievable because you've got one source of the truth. That source of the truth understands each of its individual component parts and its relationship to others. So when I move over to the left-hand side and start thinking about visualizing that in a Star Trek Enterprise type view, then I've got that base data to build that visual, knowing that if an incident, an alert happens, I can narrow down where that problem is originated from, and more importantly, what is it affecting? So I look through the wood for the trees. Now, in order for me to get there, I need help, especially if I'm trying to drive a zero approach to operations. So here's my friends, the bots. You know, they're sitting there as a layer in between me collecting information and me trying to make understanding of what that information is telling me. So therefore, you know, I obviously have bots that are across the whole spectrum here, monitoring, transacting, and determining what should happen. So from an event monitoring, I have a bot endeavoring to keep a watchful eye on what is being visualized to tech ops, and where required, pass that over to a transactional bot to actually execute an orchestrated, automated resolution, and or correlate information so that when it's visualized, it becomes more meaningful in terms of what course of actions I need to take. Now, clearly, technical operations is not just about fixing problems, it's trying to predict problems. And typically that comes from either performance or capacity issues. So the ability for me to watchfully look at how my stuff is performing and whether it's running out of stuff to provide to the user is key. And so therefore being able to visualize that again to say, look, we need to now to make a proactive action to either up CPUs, up storage, increase network capacity, whatever. You know, often you can script that and automate it, but you may wish to deliberately have manual intervention here because the implications of maybe raising a database capacity may have negative effects across the enterprise. Therefore, you want some, you know, manual intervention to approve it. Equally so, technical operations are responsible for the service request fulfillment. So when you get a change, or, you know, I want to get something in, then that needs to be both visualized, controlled, and managed, you know, hopefully through automated capabilities. And therefore, you know, we start to now build up that full encompassing view on the stuff that we have and how we're operating it. And clearly, you know, all of that is informed through, you know, extensive and analytical back engine, the dashboards as part of the visualization, and the reporting structures to get the notion of you know, what we was talking about, CMDB integrity as an example. The idea here is, you know, this is a high level view, but it tries to provide that notion of all of those tools I've got. Can I fit them within this structure? And can I now start to make some of them redundant? Because clearly they are doing the same job. And that cuts across all of these disciplines, whether it be security operations, being able to inform technical operations of an incident that needs their attention in terms of patching, emergency patch control, etc. You know, you can appreciate that the opportunities are abound. I'm going to specifically center around extending into the cloud, because unfortunately for me, many companies that I work with still have a reasonable amount of concern over how they can control their cloud consumption. And, you know, as I explained to the breakout team, you know, I remember very well sitting down with a CIO who went to see AWS, saying how could AWS help his company, and the CIO being told that the AWS had 240 accounts with that company, and it was about time IT understood what the company was using AWS for. And so therefore, that's a classic example of governance. It's a classic example of the business being able to whip out their business credit card and buy stuff without IT needing to be part of the process. So therefore, being able to govern cloud utilization and cloud management becomes very, very important. And again, the CMDB plays a pivotal role here, because if we know about the server instance or the cloud instance, then we can control it. If we can't see it, we can't control it. So therefore, I like to call it governance without barriers, because no businesses like to have to wait 6 weeks to get something that only takes a couple of hours to provision. So we need to find smart ways of doing this, and implement a cloud management platform is an ideal way of looking at that to overcome some of the dilemmas and dynamics around trying to control the cloud. And still many people use both the combination of an on-premise private versus public cloud configuration, and therefore having that as a key, what I call enterprise in its own way, and being able to manage that from end-to-end perspective, because more and more companies are using the public cloud as an apps development capability, and then promoting it in-house onto either their own version of the cloud, or indeed public cloud, but in a more secure manner. And so therefore having that type of mechanism, albeit automated and controlled, becomes increasingly as important as well. So let me just leave you with one little teaser, because one of the things that we see from a technical operations perspective is that this normally tends to be in that infrastructure security space. We've got many other factors of delivering a holistic service within a company, and therefore the notion of having a service integration and management layer integrated into technical operations, depending upon how the organization works, is kind of key, because technical operations tends to look at what it says, technically operate the environment, whereas we've got a whole host of need to look at suppliers, making sure that the suppliers are delivering in against their service levels, that if they're not, how do we find a way of triggering corrective actions to do that? How do we look at holistically introducing a new service and or releasing upgrades to applications? And how do we do that in a multi-vendor scenario through, I like to call it, the Star Trek Enterprise Command Bridge view, where your head of SIAM or technical operations has the big screens in front of them, and they're looking at their enterprise, and they can see in a visualization perspective how it's being controlled and operated. And if there's a problem, they can click instantly to see if it's an in-house operational issue, if it's a supplier that has to respond, and how is that going in terms of a service level. So hopefully that's given a little insight into driving or striving towards zero touched operations. Daniel, well, I guess we'll take questions later, so back to yourself.